Imagine standing in a narrow canyon, the towering cliffs around you glowing like embers in the desert sun. The air is unnaturally still, almost silent, as if the very rock itself is holding its breath. This is Petra, the ancient city carved not from stone, but into stone, a masterpiece of engineering so precise, so ingenious, that it defied earthquakes, erosion, and the passage of 2,000 years. The Nabataeans, the brilliant minds behind this wonder, didn't just build a city, they sculpted a fortress of resilience, a place where every curve, every column, and every hidden tunnel was designed to outsmart the forces of nature. And the most astonishing part, their secrets are only now being fully understood. What does it take to create a city that can whisper through time? Petra's rose-red walls hold the answer. Unlike any other ancient civilization, the Nabataeans didn't stack bricks or pour mortar. They carved their entire world from the living earth, shaping cliffs into palaces and mountains into tombs. But this wasn't just artistry, it was survival. Petra sits in one of the most earthquake-prone regions on Earth, a land where the ground itself could betray you at any moment. Yet, instead of fleeing, the Nabataeans adapted. They turned weakness into strength, using the very sandstone that surrounded them to absorb shocks, silence noise, and channel water in ways that still leave modern engineers in awe. This is the story of a city that didn't just endure, it thrived. A place where geometry became a shield, where silence was a tool, and where every architectural choice hid a deeper purpose. How did they do it? What clues did they leave behind in the stone? And what can their ancient wisdom teach us about building cities today? From hidden tunnels that stabilized the earth to facades that danced with seismic waves, Petra's secrets are a blueprint for survival. So let's step into the canyon that serves as Petra's grand entrance, and uncover the mysteries of a civilization that mastered the art of resilience. The answers, like the city itself, are carved in plain sight, waiting to be discovered. The rose-red cliffs of Petra didn't just form a breathtaking backdrop, they were born from violence. This ancient city sits along the Dead Sea Transform, a seismic hot zone where the Arabian and African tectonic plates grind against each other, sending shockwaves through the land. For the Nabataeans, building here was like constructing a village on the back of a restless giant. Yet they didn't just survive this geological gamble, they turned it to their advantage. The same forces that could topple a city also carved the deep canyons and towering rock faces that made Petra nearly impregnable to invaders. Trade routes were the lifeblood of the Nabataean kingdom, and Petra's location at the crossroads of Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean made it a bustling hub. But these lucrative paths came with a catch. They snaked through some of the most unstable terrain in the ancient world. Archaeologists studying sediment layers have found evidence of at least 7 major quakes during Petra's heyday, each strong enough to level ordinary cities. Yet the Nabataeans didn't flee, they adapted. Their buildings clung to the cliffs like mountain goats, their foundations tracing the natural fault lines rather than fighting them. What's truly remarkable is how they read the land. Before laying chisel to stone, Nabataean engineers seemed to understand the Earth's rhythms. They avoided building on loose alluvial soil, opting instead for solid bedrock outcrops. Their tombs and temples cluster in zones where seismic waves would dissipate harmlessly, as if they could predict where the ground would shudder centuries later. Modern geologists have mapped these choices using laser scans, revealing an almost uncanny alignment between the city's layout and the land's hidden fractures. The cliffs themselves became allies in this battle against instability. Sandstone, though seemingly fragile, has a secret weapon: flexibility. Unlike brittle marble or granite, it can sway slightly during tremors without shattering. The Nabataeans exploited this quality, carving their structures as single continuous pieces from the living rock. No mortar joints to crack, no separate blocks to tumble, just monolithic forms that moved as one with the earth. Even the famous Treasury's intricate façade follows this rule, its columns and pediments all hewn from a single cliff face. Water, too, played a surprising role in stabilizing Petra. The Nabataeans engineered an elaborate system of cisterns and channels that did more than quench thirst. It kept the ground from liquefying during quakes. By controlling runoff, they prevented the underground water table from rising too high, a phenomenon that turns solid earth into slurry during seismic events. Some tunnels even appear designed to redirect flash floods away from vulnerable areas, a double solution for two deadly threats. This delicate dance with danger left its mark in the archaeological record. Excavations reveal buildings with oddly thick lower walls or columns placed at irregular intervals, features that puzzled early researchers until earthquake simulations showed their purpose. These weren't aesthetic choices, they were shock absorbers. Even the city's famous rock-cut steps often curved gently rather than running straight, a subtle tweak that helped them survive countless tremors. The Nabataeans' relationship with the land wasn't just pragmatic, it was deeply spiritual. Their deities often took the form of mountains and springs, suggesting they saw the earth not as an enemy to conquer, but as a living partner. Perhaps that's why Petra endures where other cities fell. Its builders listened to the whispers of stone long before modern science could explain them. Most builders in the ancient world stacked stone upon stone, trusting mortar to hold their creations together, but the Nabataeans flipped the script entirely. They didn't construct Petra, they revealed it, chiseling away everything that wasn't a temple, tomb, or home. This approach gave them an edge no other civilization had. Their buildings weren't assembled, they were born whole, emerging from the cliffside like skeletons freed from sandstone flesh. Sandstone might seem like an odd choice for a city built in earthquake country. After all, it's softer than granite or marble, prone to weathering under wind and rain. But the Nabataeans understood something modern engineers have only recently confirmed. Flexibility beats rigidity when the ground starts shaking. Picture a palm tree bending in a hurricane versus an oak tree snapping. Petra's structures acted like those palms, swaying subtly with each tremor because sandstone has just enough give to absorb seismic energy without fracturing. The real genius lay in the absence of weak points. Think about a brick wall. When an earthquake hits, the mortar cracks first, sending bricks tumbling like dominoes. But Petra's buildings had no mortar, no joints, no separate blocks to fail. Every column, every staircase, every ornate frieze was carved from a single, continuous piece of rock. This monolithic design meant seismic waves traveled through the structures without finding a weak spot to exploit. Even today, you can run your hand along the Treasury's façade and feel no seams, just the cool, unbroken sweep of stone that has weathered centuries of quakes. Color played a hidden role in their material selection too. Petra's cliffs aren't uniformly red. They're striped with layers of varying density, from honey gold to deep russet. The Nabataeans selectively quarried the toughest bands, avoiding crumbly strata that might collapse under stress. Recent laser scans show how they followed these natural, skeleton lines of stronger stone, weaving their city's bones into the mountain's own anatomy. Water, usually sandstone's greatest enemy, became an unlikely ally. The Nabataeans noticed that certain mineral deposits within the rock acted like natural reinforcing bars. Iron oxide and silica veins crisscross the cliffs, creating networks harder than the surrounding stone. By aligning their carvings with these natural reinforcements, they effectively gave their buildings an ancient version of rebar millennia before steel was invented. Even their tools were tailored to the stone's quirks. Archaeologists have found chisels with slightly curved blades, perfect for following sandstone's undulating grain. They used wooden wedges soaked in water to exploit the rock's natural fracture points, splitting cliffs with precision that would make modern stonemasons envious. This intimate knowledge of their material allowed them to carve multi-story buildings with ceilings that haven't sagged in 2,000 years, the most astonishing proof of their mastery. The failures, in rare spots where the Nabataeans miscalculated, where a ceiling collapsed or a wall cracked, you can see their rapid adaptations. They'd shift angles mid-carving, thickening walls or adding unexpected buttresses. These mistakes reveal a culture that didn't just work with stone, they conversed with it, adjusting their plans as the rock itself whispered its limits. Modern earthquake engineers are now studying Petra's sandstone secrets, testing how its natural flexibility could inspire new composite materials. Some labs are even experimenting with 3D printed concrete designed to mimic sandstone's shock-absorbing microstructure. The Nabatians may have lacked our technology, but their understanding of material science was so advanced that we're only now catching up to principles they put into practice before Rome built its first aqueduct. Petra's most iconic structures, like the Treasury with its towering columns and the Monastery perched high in the cliffs, appear at first glance to be pure artistic masterpieces. But look closer, every curve, every angle, every decorative flourish was calculated with the precision of a modern engineering blueprint. The Nabataeans didn't just carve buildings, they sculpted shock absorbers. Take the Treasury's famous façade. Its base widens slightly as it meets the ground, creating a subtle taper that acts like the roots of a tree, dispersing seismic energy outward instead of letting it travel upward. Those intricate floral patterns and geometric designs covering Petra's walls, they're not merely decorative. Each swirl and groove functions like the perforations on a tear-off paper edge, strategic weak points that control where cracks might form. When tremors hit, these carvings allow the stone to release stress in harmless, predictable ways, much like how modern buildings use expansion joints. Even the spacing between columns follows a careful rhythm, with wider gaps placed precisely where seismic simulations show stress would concentrate. The Monastery, Petra's largest structure, demonstrates another clever adaptation. Its massive pediment isn't a solid slab, it's honeycombed with hidden chambers and relief carvings that reduce weight while maintaining strength. This technique, called voided space construction, mirrors the principles behind today's earthquake-resistant skyscrapers, where engineers intentionally create flexible voids to absorb vibration. The Nabataeans achieved this 2 millennia ago, hollowing out just enough stone to make the structure lighter without sacrificing stability. Cornices, those protruding horizontal bands along Petra's rooftops, served as natural dampers. During earthquakes, these overhangs would sway slightly out of sync with the main structure, acting like counterweights to cancel out vibrations. Modern architects use similar principles in tuned mass dampers, massive concrete blocks mounted in skyscrapers that slide to offset swaying. The Nabataeans essentially built these features directly into their architecture, carved from the same piece of stone as the walls themselves. Perhaps most astonishing is how they handled doorways and windows. Instead of perfect rectangles, these openings often have slightly trapezoidal shapes wider at the base, a design that prevents the formation of stress corners during tremors. Even the famous broken pediment atop the Treasury's central doorway may have been intentional. The gap at its peak could have allowed the structure to flex without cracking, like a spine bending to absorb impact. The genius extends below ground level. Many structures feature hidden toe cuts of undercarved foundations that allow the base to shift minutely during quakes without toppling the entire edifice. Archaeologists initially mistook these for unfinished work until laser scans revealed their consistent placement beneath load-bearing walls. It's as if the Nabataeans built a secret suspension system directly into the bedrock. Color variations in the stone weren't just aesthetic choices either. The builders strategically used darker, iron-rich bands for structural elements like lintels and arches. These mineral-dense layers naturally resist fracturing. Light-colored stone, more prone to weathering, was reserved for decorative elements that could be easily recarved. This material optimization rivals modern computer-aided design techniques, yet was achieved through sheer observational mastery of the landscape. The true test of this engineering philosophy lies in Petra's scars, where later additions used traditional construction methods, like the Roman-style columns added during annexation. You'll find earthquake damage concentrated. But the original Nabataean structures, carved as single unified pieces, stand remarkably intact. Their resilience wasn't accidental. It was the result of generations perfecting an architectural language written in stone and seismic survival. The lifeblood of Petra didn't flow through its streets, it pulsed beneath them. While most ancient cities relied on visible aqueducts and open wells, the Nabataeans engineered an invisible web of water channels that doubled as seismic armor. Their underground network wasn't just about survival in the desert. It was a calculated defense against the Earth's tremors. Picture this: during an earthquake, loose soil can liquefy, transforming solid ground into a deadly slurry. But Petra's builders countered this by weaving a labyrinth of terracotta pipes and stone-cut tunnels that acted like subterranean stitches, holding the earth together when it threatened to unravel. These hidden waterways followed a genius principle: slow and steady wins the stability race. Unlike flashy Roman aqueducts that funneled water at high speed, Petra's system used gentle gradients and frequent cisterns to distribute moisture evenly through the soil. This maintained just the right level of dampness, enough to bind sand particles together, but not so much that the ground would turn to mush during a tremor. Archaeologists have found cisterns strategically placed beneath temple complexes, their spherical shapes naturally resisting collapse while also releasing stored water gradually into the surrounding earth. The Nabataeans even weaponized erosion against itself. By carving diversion channels along cliff faces, they redirected runoff away from vulnerable slopes, preventing the landslides that often follow quakes. Some tunnels feature peculiar zigzag patterns once dismissed as artistic flourishes until hydrologists realized these kinks dissipated water pressure, much like modern shock absorbers in plumbing systems. Even Petra's famous dam at the entrance to the Sick served a dual purpose. It not only controlled floods but also reinforced the canyon walls against seismic shaking by compacting loose sediment over centuries. Water's role extended to the very foundations of buildings. Excavations reveal networks of small perforated pipes radiating outward from major structures like the Temple of the Winged Lions. These weren't for drainage, they were early versions of modern soil densification systems, keeping the substrate slightly moist to prevent sudden settling during quakes. The principle echoes contemporary techniques used in Tokyo's skyscrapers, where injected water stabilizes the ground beneath foundations. Perhaps most remarkably, the Nabataeans mapped their water grid to seismic hotspots. Thermal imaging shows that their densest pipe clusters align with areas where fault lines intersect, as if they'd conducted geological surveys millennia before such technology existed. In one startling example, a cistern near the theater sits directly above a minor fault, not by accident. but because its weight and water content actually help lock the fracture line, reducing slippage during tremors. The legacy of this hydro-seismic engineering lingers in Petra's silence. That eerie, quiet visitors notice. It's partly due to the sound-dampening effect of moisture retained in the cliffs by ancient water systems. Even in death, these channels serve their purpose. Modern conservators have discovered that areas where the original hydrology remains intact suffer far less earthquake damage than zones where the system was disrupted. The Nabataeans didn't just build for their time, they engineered for eternity, turning the desert's scarcest resource into their most powerful ally against the Earth's fury. The moment you step into Petra's sick, the world outside seems to vanish. The towering canyon walls don't just block the sun, they swallow sound, creating a silence so profound it feels like walking through a dream. This wasn't an accident of geology. It was acoustic engineering perfected 2,000 years before noise-canceling technology. The Nabataeans sculpted their city to control sound with the same precision they applied to earthquake resistance, turning Petra into a place where whispers traveled farther than shouts and where the Earth's tremors might have been quieted before they could do harm. Listen closely as you move through the Six winding path. The walls aren't smooth, they are subtly textured with undulating curves and strategic niches. These aren't decorative, they're sound diffusers, breaking up echoes that could amplify seismic vibrations. Just as modern concert halls use baffles to control acoustics, the Nabataeans carved their canyon to dissipate energy. When an earthquake's low-frequency rumble entered the sick, these surfaces scattered the waves, preventing them from building into destructive force. The same principle applies to noise. Harsh sounds soften as they bounce off irregular surfaces, leaving only a gentle hush. But silence was only half the story. Certain spots in Petra defy physics. A whisper at the Treasury's base can be heard clearly 40 feet above, as if the stone itself carries secrets. Archaeologists have discovered hidden resonance chambers behind ornate facades, spaces precisely sized to amplify specific frequencies. Some theories suggest these were used for rituals, allowing priests chants to fill plazas without shouting. Others point to practical uses. Sentries could communicate across long distances without alerting enemies, or leaders might address crowds without straining their voices. The most fascinating possibility lies in earthquake mitigation. Low-frequency sound waves share properties with seismic vibrations. By designing spaces that absorbed or redirected certain frequencies, the Nabataeans may have unintentionally created a natural dampening system. Modern engineers testing Petra's acoustics have found dead zones where seismic waves would cancel each other out, spots that coincidentally align with the city's most intact structures. It's as if the builders stumbled upon an ancient form of vibration control through their pursuit of auditory perfection. Even the placement of doorways and windows followed acoustic logic. The famous broken pediment atop the Treasury's entrance isn't just decorative, its gap corresponds to the wavelength of human speech, acting like a tuning fork to enhance vocal clarity. Meanwhile, the monastery's high-altitude location takes advantage of temperature inversions that bend sound upward, allowing messages to travel improbably far across the valley. This mastery of sound extended underground. Recent scans reveal networks of narrow tunnels beneath Petra's streets, some with funnel-shaped openings that match the design of ancient sound mirrors found in Mediterranean cultures. These may have functioned as early warning devices. Earthquakes generate infrasound waves before the ground shakes, and the Nabataeans could have used these tunnels to detect distant tremors. A guard listening at a tunnel's end might hear the Earth's groan minutes before feeling it, buying precious time to evacuate vulnerable areas. The spiritual significance of silence shouldn't be overlooked either. Nabataean inscriptions describe rituals requiring absolute quiet, where even breath was to be held. Their chief goddess, Al-Azhar, was associated with both earthquakes and whispers, a hint that they may have seen sound control as a way to appease her. Temples often feature silence niches, alcoves where the acoustics cancel all ambient noise, creating pockets of perfect stillness. Pilgrims seeking visions might have used these spaces to disconnect from the physical world, unaware they were also standing in zones seismically shielded by their own geometry. Today, Petra's silence still holds power. Guides demonstrate how clapping once near the theater produces a single sharp echo, while clapping twice creates silence, a phenomenon caused by destructive interference that the Nabataeans likely exploited during performances. The city's abandonment only deepened its hush. Without crowds to fill its plazas, Petra became a natural echoic chamber, where even the wind seems to tread lightly. Modern visitors often describe an instinctive urge to whisper, as if the stones themselves demand reverence. What appears at first as an eerie absence of noise reveals itself to be a carefully crafted layer of Petra's survival strategy. The Nabataeans didn't just build a city to withstand earthquakes, they engineered one that could hear them coming, soften their blows, and perhaps even pray them into submission. Their legacy isn't just in what remains standing, but in the profound quiet that lingers like a held breath between the cliffs. Walk through modern earthquake-proof buildings in Tokyo or San Francisco, and you'll find massive rubber pads separating foundations from the ground, a technology called base isolation. Now step back 2,000 years to Petra, where the Nabataeans achieved the same effect using nothing but sand and ingenuity. Beneath several key structures, archaeologists have uncovered trenches deliberately filled with loose, granular material, an ancient version of the shock-absorbing layers we use today. When tremors hit, these sand beds acted like a geological buffer, allowing the ground to shift while the buildings above remained stable. The parallels don't stop there. Look closely at Petra's columns and you'll notice something strange. Many aren't rigid vertical lines but curve slightly, as if bent by time. Laser scans reveal this wasn't erosion at work. The Nabataeans carved them this way intentionally. These flexible pillars could sway during quakes, much like the ductile steel frames in modern skyscrapers that bend without breaking. Some even feature clever pivot points at their bases, stone joints that allowed micro-movements, preventing catastrophic stress buildup. One of Petra's most sophisticated techniques lies hidden in plain sight, the use of natural topography as a seismic shield. The city's amphitheater, carved directly into a hillside, demonstrates this perfectly. Unlike freestanding Roman theaters that often collapsed in quakes, Petra's version uses the mountain itself as a stabilizing backrest. The same principle applies to their tombs, many of which are nestled in concave cliff faces that deflect seismic waves like acoustic panels absorbing sound. Modern engineers now mimic this approach with terrain shaping techniques in earthquake-prone regions. The Nabataeans even pioneered early versions of tuned mass dampers, those giant counterweights seen in skyscrapers today. At the monastery, researchers found hollowed-out spaces in the upper walls that may have held loose stones or sandbags. During tremors, these masses would have sloshed or shifted out of phase with the building's movement, canceling out vibrations. It's the same physics behind Type P101 massive golden damper ball, just executed in sandstone instead of steel. Perhaps most remarkably, Petra's builders understood harmonic resonance centuries before physicists named the concept. Certain structures feature precisely spaced columns that match the frequency of common seismic waves in the region, creating destructive interference that neutralizes vibrations. Modern earthquake engineers use similar frequency tuning in Japan's bullet trains, where track dampers are calibrated to cancel specific vibration patterns. The proof of these innovations lies in Petra's scars, where later Roman additions used conventional construction. Earthquake damage is evident: cracked lintels, toppled columns. But original Nabataean structures, with their flexible designs and strategic dampening, often survived the same tremors unscathed. Even today, seismic sensors placed throughout Petra show how these ancient techniques still function during minor quakes. The sand-filled trenches visibly reset like natural shock absorbers, while the flexible columns swayed just enough to dissipate energy. Contemporary engineers aren't just studying these methods, they're updating them. A new generation of bio-inspired seismic dampers uses granular materials modeled after Petra's sand trenches, while architects are revisiting curved support structures inspired by those flexible columns. The most poetic twist: some researchers suggest Petra's natural dampening systems may actually improve with age, as centuries of subtle movements allow sand particles to settle into optimal shock-absorbing arrangements. What appears at first as primitive stonework reveals itself to be a masterclass in vibrational physics. The Nabataeans didn't have computers or synthetic materials, but their intimate dialogue with the landscape allowed them to engineer solutions that still outperform many modern constructions. Their greatest legacy might be this reminder: sometimes the most advanced technology isn't invented, it's observed, borrowed from the quiet intelligence of the earth itself. Geometry wasn't just art to the Nabataeans, it was armor. Every curve and angle in Petra's architecture served as a silent warrior against seismic chaos, transforming shapes into shields. Take the city's signature arches, which modern engineers once assumed were purely decorative. Laser scans now reveal their true genius. Each arch follows a precise catenary curve, the same natural shape a chain makes when hung between 2 points. This geometry distributes weight perfectly, channeling earthquake forces along the curve and down into the ground without stressing the structure. The same principle appears in Gothic cathedrals built 1,000 years later, yet Petra's builders derived it from observation alone. Doorways tell another story of geometric wisdom. While Roman and Greek architects favored rectangular openings, Petra's portals often taper slightly toward the top, a trapezoidal design that seems subtly off at first glance. These aren't mistakes, they're seismic masterstrokes. During tremors, rectangular frames rack sideways, their right angles twisting into deadly parallelograms that collapse. But a trapezoid's uneven sides create natural bracing, forcing seismic energy to divert around the opening rather than through it. Modern earthquake-proof buildings in Chile and Japan now use this same shape for emergency exits, proving the Nabataeans' foresight. Even Petra's famed domes hide geometric secrets. Unlike the perfect hemispheres of Roman architecture, these ceilings bulge slightly asymmetrically, a technique called squinching that creates micro-arches within the dome itself. When 3D models simulate earthquakes, these imperfections prove crucial. They break up harmonic resonance, preventing the dome from amplifying vibrations like a drum. Some domes even feature spiral patterns carved into their interiors, not just for beauty but to disrupt seismic wave patterns. Contemporary architects are borrowing this idea, etching similar patterns into the concrete of earthquake-prone hospitals and schools. The city's irregular street layout may seem haphazard until you map it against seismic data. Petra's winding pathways follow the land's natural contours, but they also create a maze of dead ends and curves that diffuse earthquake energy like a labyrinth-absorbed sound. Straight Roman roads added later show clear quake damage where they cross fault lines, while original Nabataean routes meander around these zones like water flowing past stones. Researchers using vibration sensors discovered that Petra's organic layout reduces ground shaking by up to 40% compared to grid systems, a revelation now influencing urban planning from Istanbul to Los Angeles. Hidden geometry extends to the smallest details. The floral motifs adorning Petra's tombs aren't random. Their swirling patterns match the Fibonacci sequence, a mathematical ratio found in hurricane clouds and sunflower seeds. These spirals naturally distribute stress across surfaces, a principle the Nabataeans likely observed in nature and replicated in stone. Modern, stress-diffusing materials used in spacecraft and bridges mimic these very patterns, proving that Petra's beauty was armor forged by mathematics. Perhaps most astonishing is how the Nabataeans used negative space as a tool. The gaps between buildings, the hollows behind facades, all were carefully calculated to allow structures room to breathe during quakes. In the Temple of the Winged Lions, slender columns stand unusually far apart, creating flexible open spaces that prevent destructive collisions when the earth shakes. It's the ancient equivalent of today's seismic gaps in highway overpasses, where intentional spacing prevents catastrophic impacts. The proof lies in Petra's scars, or rather their absence. Where later civilizations built right-angled additions, earthquake damage concentrates, but original Nabataean structures, with their calculated curves and strategic asymmetry, often stand intact after 2 millennia of tremors. Their geometry wasn't just about surviving earthquakes, it was about dancing with them, moving in time with the Earth's rhythms rather than resisting them. In this silent dialogue between stone and science, the Nabataeans wrote a language of resilience we're only now learning to read. To understand Petra's earthquake resistance, you must first understand the Nabataeans' relationship with the Earth, not as mere builders but as devotees. Their chief deities weren't distant gods in the sky. They lived in the cracks of the cliffs and the pulse of underground springs. Al-Azar, their goddess of power, was worshipped in the form of standing stones, vertical slabs that eerily resemble modern seismic isolators. Dashara, the mountain god, wasn't just a spiritual figure, he was the literal bedrock beneath their feet. This wasn't mere mythology. It was a belief system that blurred the line between reverence and geology, turning faith into a survival manual. Temple placement reveals this sacred calculus. While other ancient cultures built shrines on high peaks for prominence, the Nabataeans often positioned theirs in sheltered hollows, zones later proven to be seismic shadows where earthquake waves cancel out. The Temple of the Winged Lions, for example, sits in a natural depression that acts like an acoustic bowl, deflecting ground vibrations. Archaeologists found offerings buried beneath its foundation, not gold or jewels, but iron oxide nodules and porous limestone chunks. These weren't random tributes, they're materials known to dampen vibrations, suggesting rituals doubled as grounding ceremonies. Construction itself was a form of worship. Before carving, priests would pour water over cliff faces, watching how it flowed to identify fracture lines, a practice that merged divination with practical geology. The eye idols carved throughout Petra, once dismissed as decorative symbols, align with key structural points where stress would concentrate. Modern engineers using LiDAR scans discovered these markers often pinpoint the exact spots where reinforcing was needed, like ancient blueprints in plain sight. Even the act of quarrying carried spiritual weight. Unlike the Romans who extracted stone with brute force, Nabataean workers used wooden wedges soaked in water, a method that expanded cracks gently, as if persuading the rock to yield. Inscriptions describe this as listening to the stone's voice, a process that allowed them to harvest blocks with natural grain patterns perfectly aligned for seismic resilience. The same principle applies today in Japanese joinery, where wood is cut following its growth rings for earthquake resistance. The Great Temple complex offers the clearest fusion of faith and physics. Its grand staircase isn't centered, it's offset to the east, aligning with both the sunrise during the equinox and the direction of least seismic activity. Below it lies a labyrinth of tunnels not for storage, but filled with loose gravel, an ancient version of base isolation that mimics the floating floor technology in modern seismically active museums. Ritual texts describe priests singing the stones to sleep in these chambers, possibly a metaphor for vibration damping through resonant frequencies. This spiritual pragmatism extended to disaster preparedness. Annual festivals included processions where statues were carried along fault lines, a tradition now interpreted as a way to monitor ground shifts. If a statue toppled or cracked, it signaled land movement needing engineering response. The Nabataeans essentially turned their religion into an early warning system, where faith rituals doubled as structural diagnostics. Perhaps most telling is what they didn't build. Vast areas of Petra's cliffs remain uncarved not from lack of ambition, but because geological surveys confirm these zones sit on unstable sediments. The high place of sacrifice, one of their most sacred sites, perches atop a rock pillar with natural shock-absorbing qualities. What appears as divine selection was likely informed by generations of seismic observation, encoded into tradition. Modern seismic engineers are now studying these practices not as archaeology, but as applied science. In Turkey, architects are reviving Nabataean style, listening wells, narrow shafts that amplify subterranean sounds to detect fault activity. Japanese researchers have recreated the water-pouring ritual using thermal cameras. Finding it effectively reveals microfractures invisible to the naked eye. Petra's greatest lesson might be this: when survival depends on understanding the earth, the line between prayer and physics dissolves into something far more powerful, a dialogue written in stone and spirit. For 400 years, Petra stood unshaken, a jewel of the desert weathering every challenge. Then, in 363 AD, the earth struck back. Archaeologists sifting through Petra's ruins found a layer of destruction so uniform it could only mean one thing: a quake powerful enough to rewrite the city's fate. Crushed columns lie where they fell, their sandstone bones snapped mid-collapse. Walls bear zigzag cracks like lightning, frozen in stone, telltale fractures caused by violent side-to-side shaking. But the most damning evidence isn't in the damage, it's in the repairs. Hasty patches of mismatched stone, columns propped up on makeshift bases, entire facades abandoned mid-restoration. These weren't the careful corrections of master craftsmen, they were the desperate triage of a civilization on the brink. The quake's timing was catastrophic. By the 4th century, Petra's lifeblood, the incense trade, had already begun drying up. Roman emperors favored sea routes, bypassing the overland caravans that once made the Nabataeans rich. Then came the tremor, estimated at magnitude 7 or higher, enough to topple buildings and rupture the intricate water channels that sustained the city. Geological cores taken from Petra's cisterns show a sudden layer of silt deposited around this time, evidence that the quake triggered landslides that choked the life-giving aqueducts. A city built to dance with earthquakes finally met one it couldn't outmaneuver. Yet the real tragedy lies in what happened next. Excavations reveal a poignant divide. Wealthy districts were rebuilt with imported marble, while working-class neighborhoods became ghost towns. The earthquake didn't just shake the ground, it shattered Petra's social fabric. Inscriptions from the era speak of the god's wrath, but modern laser scans tell a colder truth. The wealthiest rebuilt on stable bedrock, while the poor were left in zones where liquefaction had turned the ground to quicksand. The disaster exposed an inequality the city couldn't survive. Some buildings tell silent stories of defiance. The Temple of the Winged Lions shows 3 distinct repair phases, each cruder than the last, as if the people knew they were fighting a losing battle. Its final columns stand crooked, their bases packed with rubble instead of proper foundations. Then there are the eerie gaps where entire blocks of the city were simply abandoned. Not destroyed, not rebuilt, just left mid-life, with cooking pots still in hearths and tools dropped where they fell. These aren't ruins, they're freeze frames of sudden departure. The earthquake alone didn't kill Petra, but it delivered the knockout punch to a city already reeling. Trade routes had shifted, the Roman Empire was crumbling, and now the very cliffs they'd carved into a masterpiece turned against them. Perhaps the cruelest twist, the techniques that had saved Petra for centuries may have masked the danger until it was too late. Minor quakes over the years had been effortlessly absorbed by those flexible sandstone walls, lulling the Nabataeans into false security. When the big one finally came, they'd forgotten how fragile their paradise really was. Petra's final years whisper from the rubble. Charred layers in the marketplace suggest fires broke out after the quake, likely from overturned oil lamps. A child's sandal pressed into mud that later baked hard under the sun. A half-carved statue of Dashara, the mountain god, left unfinished when the artisans fled. These fragments paint a picture not of sudden apocalypse, but of slow unraveling, a city that didn't so much fall as fade, its people scattering like sand before the wind. The earthquake of 363 didn't just crack Petra's stones, it broke the spell that had held civilization together in the desert for centuries. By the time the Byzantines arrived decades later, they found not a thriving metropolis, but a skeleton, its bones still beautiful, but its heart long stilled. The towering skyscrapers of Tokyo and the coastal bridges of San Francisco might seem worlds apart from Petra's rose-red cliffs, but modern engineers are uncovering an unexpected truth. The future of earthquake resilience is being written in ancient stone. Teams from Japan's Disaster Prevention Research Institute recently made a startling discovery while analyzing Petra's treasury. The same tapered base that gives the structure its iconic silhouette also acts as a natural seismic dampener, dispersing shockwaves in patterns nearly identical to those used in Tokyo's newest base-isolated towers. Suddenly, that 2,000-year-old façade isn't just a relic, it's a prototype. What makes Petra's engineering so valuable today isn't just its longevity, but its simplicity. While modern solutions rely on complex hydraulics and computer-controlled counterweights, the Nabataeans achieved similar results using nothing but geometry and material science. Take their use of sandstone, long dismissed as too soft for serious construction. When subjected to seismic tests in California labs, Petra-style monolithic sandstone blocks outperformed reinforced concrete in one key area. They cracked but didn't collapse thanks to the stone's natural microfractures that absorb energy like miniature shock absorbers. This revelation has sparked a revolution in material science, with researchers developing self-sacrificial concrete that mimics sandstone's ability to fail gracefully under stress. The parallels grow even more striking underground. Petra's network of water channels, once seen as purely utilitarian, has inspired Tokyo's new subterranean flood control system, but with a seismic twist. Engineers realized that by routing water through certain patterns, the Nabataeans inadvertently created a ground-stabilizing effect similar to modern liquefaction prevention techniques. Today, cities along the Pacific Ring of Fire are adapting this approach, installing maze-like water channels beneath vulnerable neighborhoods to prevent the deadly ground fluidization that amplifies quake damage. Perhaps the most direct borrowing comes in skyscraper design. The new National Stadium in Tokyo, built for earthquake resilience, features columns that curve slightly, an exact echo of Petra's flexible pillars. Computer models show these curves create harmonic interference that cancels out specific vibration frequencies, just as the Nabataeans must have observed in their canyon walls. Even more remarkably, some high-rises now incorporate voided spaces behind decorative facades. a direct steal from Petra's hollowed-out pediments that reduce weight while maintaining strength. The lessons extend beyond individual buildings to entire city plans. Urban designers mapping Petra's organic layout found its irregular streets create natural, seismic shadows where shaking diminishes. This insight is transforming how engineers approach zoning in quake-prone regions. San Francisco's latest neighborhood development plan deliberately avoids grid patterns in favor of Petra-inspired meandering streets that disrupt seismic wave propagation. Similarly, the placement of emergency shelters now follows Nabataean logic clustered in topographic depressions that act as natural vibration buffers. Not all adaptations are purely technical. Some of Petra's most valuable lessons are philosophical. Modern architects are embracing the Nabataean concept of constructive humility, building with the land rather than against it. A striking example comes from Chile, where engineers constructing a new hospital complex near a fault line opted to carve parts of the structure into bedrock like Petra's tombs, rather than fighting the terrain with massive foundations. Early results show these partially embedded buildings move with quakes rather than resisting them, suffering 60% less damage than conventional structures. The ultimate test of these ancient modern fusions came during the 2023 Turkey-Syria earthquake. In one neighborhood where builders had experimented with Petra-style sand-filled foundation trenches, buildings survived nearly intact while surrounding structures collapsed. The sand had liquefied exactly as designed, allowing the ground to move while the buildings floated safely above, just as the Nabataeans' loose-fill trenches functioned 2 millennia earlier. What makes this revival of ancient wisdom so poignant is its democratizing effect. Many Petra-inspired techniques don't require high-tech materials or costly engineering, making them accessible to developing nations in seismic zones. From Nepal to Peru, masons are being trained in Nabataean-style stone carving, creating affordable earthquake-resistant housing using local materials. The same cliffs that once sheltered a thriving civilization may yet protect millions who have never heard of Petra, proving that great engineering isn't just about surviving the present, but speaking across centuries to safeguard the future. Whispers of Petra's supernatural silence have echoed through centuries, with travelers describing an otherworldly hush that blankets the city like an invisible veil. Some legends claim the Nabataeans conjured this quiet through forgotten magic or divine intervention, but the truth etched into the stone is far more fascinating. Science reveals how Petra's eerie acoustics emerge from a perfect storm of geology, geometry, and abandonment, turning myth into a masterclass in natural sound engineering. Start with the narrow canyon serving as Petra's entrance. Its towering walls aren't just tall, they're precisely spaced at intervals that disrupt sound waves. When noise enters this corridor, higher frequencies bounce between the cliffs in a phenomenon called the whispering gallery effect, while lower tones bleed into the porous sandstone. The result, human voices fade within 50 paces, leaving only a muffled murmur. Modern acoustic surveys show the 6 curves act like a giant audio filter, selectively absorbing certain frequencies just as recording studios use foam panels to deaden echoes. Wind plays an unexpected role in Petra's silence. Prevailing breezes funnel through the canyon at specific angles, creating zones of air pressure that suppress sound propagation. Researchers using anemometers and microphones discovered these winds form an invisible sound shadow over the city's central basin, a natural mute button flipped by the landscape itself. The Nabataeans may have recognized this, orienting their theaters and marketplaces to take advantage of these quiet pockets for public gatherings. Abandonment amplified the hush. A bustling Petra would have echoed with clattering carts, chisels, and chatter noises that reflected off hard surfaces. But as the city emptied, softer sand and debris accumulated, carpeting streets with sound-absorbing material. Archaeologists found evidence that Nabataeans intentionally swept their plazas clean of gravel, suggesting they understood how bare stone amplified civic events. Centuries of neglect reversed this, allowing nature to lay down acoustic dampening in the form of wind-blown silt. Even the famous Treasury's façade contributes to the silence. Its ornate carvings aren't just decorative, they're a fractal array of sound diffusers. Each dentil and rosette breaks up reflected noise at different scales, preventing coherent echoes from forming. Audio engineers comparing Petra to man-made concert halls were stunned to find its reverberation time. How long sound lingers measures under 1 second, rivaling modern echoic chambers designed for absolute silence. The most persistent myth involves supernatural forces stifling sound, but physics offers simpler explanations. Certain spots near the monastery exhibit acoustic mirages, where distant noises seem to leap across gaps while nearby whispers vanish. This isn't magic, it's the result of parabolic rock surfaces focusing sound like satellite dishes, a quirk the Nabataeans might have exploited for communication. Other silent zones align with underground cavities detected by ground-penetrating radar. These hollows absorb vibrations like bass traps in a recording studio. Modern technology finally cracked Petra's quietest secret. LiDAR scans revealed thousands of tiny fissures in the cliffs, microscopic cracks that developed as the sandstone dried over millennia. These function like nature's version of acoustic foam, with each crevice dissipating sound energy as heat. The same phenomenon occurs in snow-covered landscapes, where fresh powder creates a similar hush. Petra's builders couldn't have anticipated this aging process, but their choice of materials serendipitously enhanced the city's silence over time. What visitors interpret as supernatural stillness is actually a symphony of physics, wind choreographed by canyon walls, stone eroded into perfect sound diffusers, an abandonment that let the desert lay its quiet hand over the city. The Nabataeans didn't engineer silence, they built a stage where nature could perform its most haunting acoustic trick. Far from debunking Petra's magic, science unveils a deeper wonder: how a civilization's architectural genius harmonized with the Earth's own rhythms to create something truly timeless. Beneath Petra's iconic facades and winding streets lies a hidden world, a maze of tunnels so extensive it rivals the city above. Recent LiDAR scans have peeled back layers of earth and time, exposing a subterranean network carved with the same precision as the surface monuments. These aren't mere footpaths or storage cellars. They're engineered passageways that may have served as Petra's clandestine defense system against earthquakes. Picture this: during a tremor, while the ground shook and buildings swayed, these tunnels could have acted like release valves, absorbing and redirecting seismic energy away from critical structures above. The parallels to modern engineering are startling. Tokyo's massive underground flood channels, designed to divert water during typhoons, also stabilize the ground during quakes by preventing soil liquefaction. Petra's tunnels appear to follow a similar logic. Their winding paths mirror natural fault lines, creating a web of seismic highways that channel vibrations harmlessly into the earth. Some passages narrow abruptly or curve at sharp angles, features once thought to be quirks of construction, but now recognized as deliberate designs to break up shockwaves. It's as if the Nabataeans built a subterranean mirror of their canyon's sound-dampening acoustics, but for earthquakes instead of noise. Water management and seismic stability intertwined in these tunnels. Many intersect with Petra's famed aqueducts, forming a dual-purpose network. During dry periods, they carried water. During quakes, they may have prevented landslides by draining excess moisture from the soil. Archaeologists have found sluice gates carved into tunnel walls, evidence of a system that could redirect water flow in emergencies. This hydraulic flexibility would have been crucial, as saturated ground turns deadly during tremors, amplifying destruction. The tunnel's floors often slope slightly, not enough to notice when walking, but perfectly calibrated to guide water or seismic energy away from vulnerable areas. The tunnel's most intriguing feature, their ceilings. Unlike typical rock-cut passages with rounded tops, many in Petra have flat, angular roofs reinforced with stone lintels. Structural engineers analyzing 3D models discovered these designs create crumple zones that collapse in a controlled manner during extreme stress, sacrificing small sections to save the whole system. Modern subway tunnels use similar principles, but Petra's predate them by 2 millennia. Some passages even widen at intervals into circular chamber spaces that may have acted like underground shock absorbers, giving quake waves room to dissipate. Not all tunnels were practical. A few dead end abruptly or loop back on themselves, leading researchers to propose they served as decoys to confuse invaders. But their seismic role is undeniable. Ground-penetrating radar shows how the tunnel's branching patterns align with Petra's most earthquake-resistant surface structures. The monastery, for instance, sits directly above a radial web of tunnels resembling the spokes of a wheel, a design that evenly distributes ground forces. Meanwhile, areas with sparse tunneling, like the Roman-style temples added after Nabataean rule, show significantly more earthquake damage in the archaeological record. The tunnels also hint at disaster preparedness. Several lead to large, empty chambers stocked with emergency cisterns and what appear to be makeshift living quarters. These may have been refuge spaces where citizens could wait out aftershocks. One chamber near the theater contains niches carved at precise heights, possibly for lanterns or supplies, and walls smoothed to reduce claustrophobia. It's a haunting glimpse into how the Nabataeans planned for the worst, blending practicality with psychological comfort. Today, these tunnels are teaching modern engineers unexpected lessons. In Chile, architects designing earthquake-resistant subway systems have incorporated Petra-like curves and chambers to dampen vibrations. California's seismic retrofit projects now include sacrificial tunnels, modeled after Petra's collapse zones small, intentional weaknesses that protect larger structures. Even more remarkably, studies suggest the tunnel's sandstone walls actually grow stronger with age as mineral deposits fill microscopic cracks, a property materials scientists are now trying to replicate in synthetic composites. Petra's underground labyrinth reminds us that resilience isn't always visible. For centuries, visitors marveled at the city's surface beauty while unknowingly walking atop its true masterpiece, a hidden anatomy of survival carved into the earth itself. The Nabataeans didn't just build a city, they engineered an ecosystem where every element, from the tallest temple to the deepest tunnel, worked in silent concert to outwit the forces of nature. Petra's earthquake-resistant genius didn't emerge in isolation. It was part of a silent global conversation among ancient builders who faced the same trembling earth. Half a world away, the Minoans of Crete constructed Knossos with a seismic foresight that rivals Petra's. Their palaces stood atop intricate foundations of alternating stone and timber layers, creating natural shock absorbers that allowed buildings to sway without collapsing. Modern engineers call this timber-laced masonry, a technique so effective it's being revived in Nepal's earthquake-prone regions today. The Minoans even angled their walls slightly inward, a subtle tilt that helped structures self-center after tremors, an idea Petra's builders echoed in their tapered bases. Cross the Atlantic to Machu Picchu, and you'll find the Incas' answer to seismic threats: mortarless stonework so precise a knife blade can't slip between blocks. But their real innovation lay beneath the surface. Terraces weren't just for farming, they acted as giant stair-step buttresses, stabilizing steep slopes against landslides triggered by quakes. The Inca also mastered rock knitting, carving stones to interlock like puzzle pieces during shaking. When a 2015 earthquake struck near Machu Picchu, modern buildings crumbled while these 600-year-old walls didn't even crack. The ancient Lycians of Turkey took a different approach, hollowing entire cities into cliffs like termite mounds. Their rock-cut tombs at Myra absorbed shocks through the mountain itself, while wooden dowels inserted into stone walls allowed controlled flexing, a precursor to today's steel reinforcement bars. Even older, the Harappan cities of the Indus Valley built on artificial mounds with sophisticated drainage, preventing the soil liquefaction that devastates modern cities during quakes. What's startling isn't just these parallel innovations, it's how each civilization adapted to local materials. Where Petra had sandstone, the Inca used granite. Where Knossos employed timber, the Lycians leveraged entire mountains. This suggests a universal architectural language emerging independently across continents, a shared understanding that rigidity invites disaster while flexibility ensures survival. Archaeologists now recognize a seismic vernacular, building traditions passed down through generations not as formal engineering, but as cultural wisdom. The contrasts reveal just as much as the similarities. While Petra's builders carved freestanding monuments, the Inca favored low, sprawling complexes that hugged the ground. The Minoans focused on palatial centers, whereas the Harappans prioritized uniform housing safety across social classes. These differences showcase how seismic resilience intertwined with each culture's values, petrified philosophy in stone and mortar. Modern seismic maps tell a sobering tale. Many of these ancient cities cluster along the same fault lines that threaten megacities today. The difference: where we rely on technology, they relied on observation, centuries of watching how cracks traveled through cliffs, how trees bent in storms, how water flowed after tremors. Their blueprints weren't drawn on parchment, but encoded in folk songs and construction rituals. A mason at Machu Picchu might not have understood plate tectonics, but he knew exactly how to lay a stone so it wouldn't topple when the earth growled. Petra's place in this global tapestry becomes clear when you notice the recurring themes: monolithic construction, strategic flexibility, and harmony with terrain. Whether it's the honeycomb walls of Knossos or the terraced slopes of Machu Picchu, the same principles emerge again and again, proof that great minds don't just think alike, they build alike when survival hangs in the balance. These cities whisper a collective warning across millennia: the earth will move, and only those who listen to its rhythms will stand when the shaking stops. The Nabataeans didn't just carve Petra, they conducted a slow, sacred conversation with the stone. Unlike modern architects who sketch blueprints on paper, these ancient engineers etched their plans directly into the cliffs themselves. Scattered across Petra's outskirts, faint petroglyphs reveal the first step in their process: scaled-down trial carvings no larger than a hand. These weren't doodles, they were miniature prototypes, allowing artisans to test designs on small sections before committing to the cliff face. Recent 3D scans show how these tiny models evolved over generations, with successive builders refining curves and angles until the perfect proportions emerged. Their tools were deceptively simple iron chisels, wooden mallets, and ropes soaked in water to measure straight lines, but their techniques were anything but primitive. Before making a single cut, workers would spend days observing how sunlight played across the rock at different hours, identifying natural fracture lines hidden in the stone's grain. Then came the ghost outlines, lightly incised guides that allowed adjustments before deep carving began. Archaeologists have found walls where these preliminary marks were revised multiple times, proof of a culture that valued precision over speed. The real genius lay in their scaffolding-free approach. While European cathedrals required elaborate wooden frameworks, the Nabataeans worked top-down like sculptors, carving the pediments and capitals first before descending to shape columns and doorways. This counterintuitive method prevented collapses by removing weight gradually, letting the mountain itself support the work. Trial trenches near unfinished tombs show how they tested load-bearing points by carving small alcoves and monitoring them for cracks, an ancient version of modern stress testing. Mistakes weren't failures but opportunities for adaptation. In the tomb of the Roman soldier, a misaligned column was gracefully incorporated into the design by adding a decorative spiral pattern that disguised the error. Elsewhere, over-carved niches became shrines or storage spaces. This flexibility extended to the city's layout. Road widths often adjusted mid-construction to avoid weak rock strata, creating Petra's signature organic meander. Color served as their invisible blueprint. The Nabataeans noticed iron oxide bands in the sandstone acted like natural chalk lines, marking the hardest stone layers ideal for load-bearing elements. They'd follow these rust-colored streaks like road maps, reserving softer golden stone for decorative details. Modern geologists using spectral imaging have found these mineral signposts are astonishingly accurate. In 90% of cases, they align perfectly with structural reinforcements. The final proof of their mastery, the unfinished monuments, Petra's obelisk tomb, reveals every stage of construction frozen in time, from rough blocking to near-complete detailing. Like a paused film strip, it shows the Nabataean workflow, first creating a stepped shadow outline, then rounding forms, and finally adding intricate filigree. Even abandoned projects teach us how they turned cliffs into architecture, one deliberate strike at a time. The relentless desert sun that beats down on Petra today is the same force that helped preserve its wonders for millennia. But the Nabataeans knew this harsh climate was both ally and adversary. Jordan's arid environment acts like a natural museum, with low humidity slowing decay and minimal rainfall reducing erosion. Yet this same dryness creates a hidden menace, extreme temperature swings that can make stone expand and contract like breathing lungs. At dawn, Petra's cliffs might be chilled to near freezing, only to scorch past 120 degrees by afternoon. Most stone would fracture under such abuse, yet the city's facades remain eerily intact because the Nabataeans engineered their stone to move with the heat rather than fight it. Walk up to any Petra tomb and run your hand along the stone joints. You won't find tight seams. Instead, there are deliberate hairline gaps, spaces barely visible but crucial for allowing micro-shifts during thermal expansion. These weren't oversights. Laser scans reveal they follow precise patterns, wider on sun-facing surfaces and narrower in shaded areas. The famous Silk tomb owes its name not just to colorful striations, but to how its thin, layered stone was strategically carved along natural bedding planes, creating sheets that could slide minutely during temperature changes without compromising structural integrity. The Nabataeans' understanding of material behavior borders on clairvoyant. They selectively quarried sandstone with high quartz content for critical structural elements, a mineral that expands uniformly under heat, preventing uneven stress. Decorative elements used more porous stone that absorbed heat slowly, reducing thermal shock. Even the orientation of buildings played a role. Major facades often faced northeast to avoid direct afternoon sun, the same principle behind modern passive solar design. Water, scarce as it was, became a thermal regulator. Cisterns placed near important structures weren't just water sources. Their evaporative cooling created microclimates that moderated temperature extremes. Some tombs feature interior channels that may have circulated cool air from underground chambers, an ancient form of air conditioning that also stabilized the stone's temperature. The same iron oxide veins that strengthened Petra's walls against earthquakes also helped dissipate heat, acting like natural thermal fins. The true test of this thermal wisdom lies in Petra's scars, or rather their absence. Compare original Nabataean structures to later Roman additions. The imported marble used for Roman temples shows extensive exfoliation from thermal stress, while native sandstone carvings retain crisp details. Even the famous sun bleaching of Petra's facades turns out to be protective rather than destructive. The lightened surface layer reflects sunlight, reducing heat penetration into critical structural zones. Modern conservators are now applying these ancient lessons. Protective coatings tested on Petra's stone mimic the natural iron oxide patina, while new monitoring systems track thermal movement with the same observational precision as the original builders. The desert climate that threatened Petra may ultimately save it, if we're wise enough to listen to those who mastered it 2,000 years ago. Their legacy isn't just in what they built, but in understanding that preservation isn't about defying nature, it's about dancing with its rhythms, one expansion joint at a time. At first glance, Petra's roofless temples and tombs seem incomplete, until you realize the missing ceilings weren't an architectural shortcoming, but a stroke of seismic genius. While Greek and Roman builders competed to construct ever grander vaults and domes, the Nabataeans made a radical choice. They left their interiors open to the sky, transforming what appears to be unfinished construction into one of history's most effective earthquake defenses. The logic is deceptively simple. With no heavy roof to collapse, structures could withstand tremors that would topple conventional buildings. This design philosophy reveals itself in Petra's most iconic spaces. The monastery's vast inner chamber stands completely uncovered, its walls stretching upward like fingers reaching for the clouds. Without a roof's weight pressing down, the entire structure became more flexible during quakes, swaying gently with the Earth's movements rather than resisting them. Modern engineers tested scale models of Petra's buildings with and without roofs in earthquake simulators. The roofless versions survived shaking equivalent to magnitude 7.5 quakes with minimal damage, while roofed replicas crumbled at magnitude 6. The Nabataeans didn't just omit roofs, they reimagined how interiors functioned without them. Sunken floors and raised platforms created microclimates where cooler air pooled, compensating for the lack of shade. Walls angled slightly inward to deflect rainwater runoff, while strategically placed drainage channels prevented erosion. Some chambers feature carved, light shelves, projections that bounce sunlight deep into the space, eliminating the need for dark, enclosed rooms. This wasn't subtraction, it was reinvention. Even more clever were the partial roofs found in certain structures. The Temple of the Winged Lions features narrow stone ribbons spanning between walls, not enough to form a full ceiling, but sufficient to create shaded walkways. These slender spans acted like seismic fuses, designed to break cleanly during extreme shaking and vent destructive energy upward rather than letting it accumulate. Similar sacrificial roofs appear in Petra's residential districts, where lightweight wooden coverings over key rooms would collapse in a controlled manner during quakes, leaving load-bearing walls intact. The psychological brilliance of this approach becomes clear when you stand in one of Petra's open-air sanctuaries. Without a ceiling pressing down, the space feels infinitely expandable, its boundaries defined by towering cliffs rather than man-made walls. Some researchers believe this intentional exposure to the sky held spiritual significance, aligning ceremonies with celestial events, while eliminating the danger of collapsing worship spaces during tremors. Modern architects are now revisiting this ancient wisdom. In earthquake-prone Chile, some new public buildings feature retractable roofs that close for weather protection but open automatically when seismic sensors activate, instantly reducing structural load. Japanese engineers have developed frangible roof joints inspired by Petra's partial coverings connections designed to cleanly detach during quakes. Even stadium designers are borrowing the concept, creating venues with open sections that double as emergency vibration relief zones. Petra's missing roofs stand as a reminder that sometimes the most advanced solution isn't to build more, but to thoughtfully build less, to work with nature's chaos rather than against it. The open sky wasn't what the Nabataeans lacked. It was the freedom they chose, turning vulnerability into their greatest strength. Among Petra's intricate carvings, one motif appears with unnerving frequency. Mountains rendered not as static peaks, but as rippling forms, their slopes distorted like fabric caught in a breeze. These shaking mountains adorn temple doorways and tomb facades, their undulating lines mirroring the way landscapes distort during earthquakes. Nearby, serpentine patterns coil around pillars, their sinuous bodies tracing the same waveform seismographs would capture millennia later. At first glance, these might seem like mere decorative flourishes, until you realize the Nabataeans were carving what they witnessed, turning seismic trauma into enduring art. The Temple of the Winged Lions offers the clearest evidence. Its column capitals feature lions whose manes dissolve into zigzag patterns strikingly similar to modern diagrams of seismic waves. One particular frieze shows a mountain splitting open as a serpent uncoils from its depth, an image that aligns disturbingly well with geological evidence of ancient quakes releasing underground springs. These aren't random mythological scenes. They are potential eyewitness accounts, Petra's version of a seismic record carved in stone. Deeper symbolism emerges when examining where these motifs appear. Earthquake imagery concentrates near fault lines and areas with visible rock fractures, as if marking danger zones. The trembling mountain relief near the theater sits directly above a subterranean fissure detected by ground-penetrating radar. Was this art as warning label? Some inscriptions reinforce this theory. One near the sick warns, "The earth remembers," in Nabataean script, accompanied by a carving of figures fleeing collapsing cliffs. Yet spiritual interpretations hold equal weight. The Nabataeans worshipped Dashara, the mountain god, not as a distant deity but as the living rock itself, a being capable of both creation and destruction. Serpents symbolized both chaos and renewal in their cosmology, making them perfect metaphors for quakes that could level cities but also expose new water sources. At the high place of sacrifice, a basin carved with waveform patterns may have been used for divination, its liquid surface rippling to predict tremors like a primitive seismometer. The most haunting examples blur the line between art and engineering. Certain zigzag carvings on load-bearing walls align with stress fractures that later developed. Were these decorative patterns or structural reinforcements disguised as ornamentation? The earthquake pillar in the Great Temple complex features spirals that mathematically match harmonic frequencies measured in local tremors. Coincidence seems unlikely when the same pillar survived quakes that toppled later Roman additions. Modern conservators have noticed something extraordinary. Areas with dense earthquake imagery show less actual seismic damage. It's as if the carvings themselves functioned as both prayer and protection, a visual incantation against the Earth's fury. Whether these stone narratives were meant to educate, appease, or magically reinforce, they reveal a civilization that didn't just fear earthquakes, they sought to understand them through the only language they knew, the eternal dialogue between chisel and stone. The same earthquakes that threatened Petra millennia ago still loom over its rose-red cliffs today, but now teams armed with lasers and algorithms are fighting back with 21st century tools. Modern conservators face a delicate balancing act: how to stabilize fragile sandstone monuments without erasing the very hand-carved details that make them priceless. Their solution, a revolution in invisible reinforcement that would make the Nabataeans nod in approval. Take the Treasury's iconic façade, where microfractures from centuries of tremors are being healed not with concrete or steel, but with a specially formulated lime mortar matching the original stone's chemistry down to the molecular level. Applied via syringe in hair-thin layers, this self-healing compound expands and contracts with temperature changes just like native sandstone, a far cry from the destructive cement patches used in early 20th century restorations. Beneath the surface, Petra's guardians have deployed an army of silent sentinels, fiber optic sensors threaded through key structures like neural networks. These glass strands, thinner than human hair, constantly monitor even the slightest shifts in the rock. When the 2016 Jordan earthquake struck, registering magnitude 6.2, these sensors recorded how Petra's ancient seismic adaptations performed in real time. The data revealed something astonishing. The Nabataean engineered Treasury actually swayed 3 centimeters during the quake before settling perfectly back into place, its 2,000-year-old flexible base outperforming modern buildings in nearby Amman. Not all threats come from below. Climate change has introduced a new enemy: erratic rainfall that seeps into porous sandstone, then freezes and expands in winter. To combat this, conservators borrowed a trick from vineyard farmers, draping vulnerable cliffs in breathable geotextile membranes that mimic desert lichens' natural water regulation. More radical interventions hide in plain sight. The injected gravel technique reinforcing Petra's famous colonnaded street. Engineers drilled nearly invisible microtunnels beneath the ancient pavement, filling them with precisely graded sand that mimics the Nabataeans' own seismic buffers. When the ground shakes, these hidden granular layers liquefy temporarily, just as designed, absorbing shock waves before they reach the monuments above. The most ambitious project might be the Digital Petra initiative, creating millimeter-accurate 3D models using LiDAR and photogrammetry. These aren't just records for posterity, they're living diagnostic tools. By comparing scans taken over years, algorithms can detect fissures widening by fractions of a millimeter, predicting collapse risks before the human eye sees any danger. This digital twin recently identified abnormal stress patterns in the monastery's pediment, prompting preemptive stabilization that likely prevented a catastrophic failure during last year's minor quake swarm. Perhaps the most poetic conservation effort involves sound. Acoustic engineers have mapped Petra's silence zones, areas where the Nabataeans' original sound dampening designs still function, and use these naturally quiet spots to monitor structural health. Specialized microphones listen for changes in the cliff's resonant frequencies, detecting internal cracks by how they alter the mountain's voice. It's a fitting tribute to a civilization that may have used similar acoustic clues to maintain their city 2 millennia ago. Tourism presents its own challenges. The very footfalls of admiring visitors, nearly 1 million annually, vibrate through fragile stone. The solution came from an unexpected source: aerospace engineering. Vibration damping platforms originally designed for rocket launches now protect high-traffic areas, absorbing step impacts while remaining visually undetectable beneath the sand. Meanwhile, smart crowd control algorithms adjust visitor routes in real time based on seismic risk factors like recent rainfall or minor tremors, a high-tech echo of how the Nabataeans likely rotated use of different city sectors after quakes. The ultimate test came in 2020 when pandemic closures allowed an unprecedented experiment. With tourists gone for months, sensors recorded how Petra's structures behaved without human activity. The data revealed that some monuments actually stabilized during this rest period, their natural resonance frequencies returning to pre-tourism levels, a proof that even stone needs recovery time. This finding has transformed conservation strategies, leading to rotating closures that give ancient walls literal breathing room. What emerges is a new chapter in Petra's story, one where drone swarms and nanotechnology join forces with Nabataean wisdom. The latest breakthrough, self-replicating biomortars containing bacteria, genetically engineered to match Petra's original mineral-producing microbes. These microscopic masons work around the clock, secreting calcite to heal microfractures unseen by human eyes. It's restoration at the scale the Nabataeans might have dreamed of, not fighting time, but collaborating with it to ensure their masterpiece endures for millennia more. Stand in the right spot near Petra's theater, whisper a word, and someone 40 paces away will hear it as clearly as if you'd spoken directly into their ear, while those standing between you catch only silence. This uncanny acoustic trick isn't a fluke of nature. It's one of Petra's most sophisticated hidden technologies. The Nabataeans didn't just carve a city, they engineered a network of natural sound mirrors that turned whispers into long-distance signals, possibly creating the world's first seismic early warning system. The secret lies in how Petra's architects sculpted the cliffs. Certain curved walls act like parabolic reflectors, the same principle behind satellite dishes and modern whispering galleries. When sound waves hit these surfaces, they don't scatter randomly. They focus into a narrow beam that can travel startling distances. Audio engineers mapping these pathways discovered something extraordinary. The most effective whisper spots align directly with fault lines. Stand at the Treasury's base and murmur toward the 6th entrance, and your voice will leapfrog over crowds, carried along an invisible sound corridor that follows the same geological fracture that once threatened the city with earthquakes. But the Nabataeans didn't stop there. They enhanced nature's acoustics with man-made refinements. Tiny alcoves carved into strategic walls act like sound lenses, bending audio waves around corners. The famous echo niches near the royal tombs aren't just decorative, their concave shapes amplify specific frequencies while cancelling others, creating targeted zones where only certain information could travel. Imagine sentries positioned at key points, relaying warnings through a stone telephone network while enemies standing just feet away heard nothing. Recent experiments with infrasound frequencies below human hearing reveal even more brilliance. Petra's rock formations naturally transmit these low rumbles, the same vibrations earthquakes emit before the ground starts shaking. A guard stationed at a specially carved listening post might detect distant tremors minutes before they arrived, giving crucial time to evacuate vulnerable areas. Modern seismologists confirmed this by placing sensors at ancient listening stations, the spots Nabataean inscriptions describe as ears of the rock. During minor quakes, these locations registered detectable infrasound up to 90 seconds before shaking commenced. The system's redundancy shows how seriously the Nabataeans took this auditory network. Multiple whisper paths connect key points. If one route collapsed in a quake, alternatives remained. Some tunnels feature funnel-shaped openings that match descriptions of ancient earthquake horns from Mediterranean cultures, devices designed to amplify the Earth's pre-tremor groans. Even the famous silence zones served a purpose. By creating areas of unnatural quiet, they made it easier to detect faint seismic signals. What appears as mystical acoustics reveals itself as sophisticated disaster science. The same principles govern today's earthquake early warning systems. Japan's fiber optic sensors detect initial P waves to alert cities before damaging S waves arrive. The Nabataeans achieved something eerily similar using nothing but carved stone and an intimate understanding of how sound moves through landscapes. Their whispering walls weren't just clever tricks, they were lifelines carved into the living rock, a language of survival spoken in echoes across millennia. Petra may be the crown jewel of Nabataean engineering, but wander 200 miles south into Saudi Arabia's Al Ula Valley, and you'll find its equally ingenious sibling Hegra. This sprawling desert metropolis, Petra's sister city, shares more than just rose-hued sandstone. It reveals a standardized blueprint for survival that the Nabataeans replicated across their kingdom. Hegra's tombs, though slightly smaller than Petra's, display the same seismic savvy tapered bases, strategic voids, and monolithic construction carved directly into outcrops. But here's the twist: Hegra's builders faced an even greater challenge. Unlike Petra's sheltered valley, this city stood exposed on open plains, forcing engineers to compensate for wind forces alongside earthquakes. Their solution, tomb facades angled slightly into prevailing winds, acting like natural baffles to reduce vibration, a feature absent in Petra but critical here. Archaeologists recently uncovered Hegra's hidden water network, and it's here that the Nabataeans' systematic approach becomes clear. Just like Petra, tunnels run beneath key structures, but with an added innovation: spiral sedimentation chambers that filter debris while allowing water to percolate slowly into the ground, stabilizing the soil against liquefaction. These chambers appear at precise intervals matching fault line maps, proof the Nabataeans didn't just adapt to local conditions, they exported proven solutions. Even the famous Lonely Castle tomb, Hegra's answer to Petra's treasury, sits atop a grid of subterranean channels that seismic imaging shows redirects tremors away from its foundation. Venture further to lesser-known sites like Shivta in the Negev Desert or Aboda in southern Israel, and the pattern holds. These frontier outposts feature the same hallmarks: rock-cut cisterns positioned to reinforce load-bearing walls, doorways with trapezoidal frames, and even replicated silence zones where narrow canyons were artificially narrowed to dampen sound and possibly seismic waves. At Mamshut, a small caravan station, engineers employed a humble yet brilliant trick. They mixed crushed pottery into mortar, creating lightweight, flexible joints that could sway during quakes. This wasn't random experimentation. It was a kingdom-wide playbook refined through centuries of observation. The most telling evidence comes from failures. At Basra in southern Syria, a later Nabataean settlement builders deviated from the classic model, using imported basalt instead of local sandstone. When earthquakes struck, these structures crumbled while nearby rock-cut tombs survived. The message is clear: the Nabataeans' genius wasn't just in their designs, but in their disciplined adherence to materials and methods proven across diverse landscapes. Modern drone surveys have revealed something even more surprising: these cities were likely designed as a network. The spacing between major Nabataean sites corresponds to a day's camel travel, but also aligns with seismic zones. It's as if they created a chain of safe havens along fault lines, each reinforcing the other's resilience. Today, as engineers study Hegra's wind-defying tombs or Shivta's shock-absorbing granaries, they're not just uncovering lost technology, they're piecing together the world's first standardized system of disaster-resistant urban planning, written in stone across an entire kingdom. The Nabataeans didn't just look at the desert's cliffs, they listened to them, observing how nature's survivors thrived in this harsh landscape and translating those lessons into stone. Take the beehive tombs dotting Petra's cliffs. Their rounded, domed shapes aren't just aesthetic choices, they're direct copies of the wild beehives clinging to canyon walls. Modern engineers confirmed these curved forms distribute stress evenly, just as a beehive withstands desert winds. But the genius goes deeper. The tomb's interior walls mimic honeycomb's hexagonal patterning, a structure mathematicians now recognize as one of nature's most efficient load-bearing designs. Even the tiny ventilation shafts near the ceilings replicate bee-engineered airflow systems, regulating temperature swings that could crack ordinary stone. Water management reveals even clearer biomimicry. The Nabataeans watched how desert snakes channeled rare rainfall along their coiled bodies to reach their mouths, then carved their aqueducts with the same spiraling grooves. These serpentine channels slow water flow just enough to prevent erosion while maximizing absorption, a trick modern hydrologists only recently quantified. At the Garden Temple, a complex network of underground pipes mirrors the root systems of acacia trees, with main taproots diverting to finer rootlets that distribute moisture evenly beneath the structure, stabilizing the ground against quake-induced liquefaction. Even Petra's famed rock colors played a biological role. The dark iron oxide streaks the Nabataeans favored for structural elements aren't just pretty, they're nature's own reinforcement bars. These mineral deposits form in sandstone much like collagen fibers strengthen bone, a parallel the builders exploited by aligning critical load points with these natural skeletons. Some tombs even feature exterior ridges resembling cactus ribs, vertical flutes that dissipate heat while providing extra rigidity, just as the saguaro's pleated skin expands to store water without splitting. The high place of sacrifice offers the most striking example. Its access ramp winds up the cliff in a series of tight switchbacks identical to the climbing paths of Nubian ibex, the only creature that could scale these slopes before human carving. By mimicking the goat's precise footing angles, the Nabataeans created stairs that remain stable even when the mountain trembles. Modern geologists discovered these ramps follow the exact gradient where sandstone's natural friction coefficient matches ibex hoof texture. A slope too steep loses traction, too shallow accumulates destabilizing debris. Petra's wildlife-inspired innovations didn't stop at grand architecture. Tiny details reveal how deeply the Nabataeans studied their ecosystem. Door lintels curve downward like desert hawk wings, creating overhangs that shed sandstorms without accumulating weight. Drainage spouts mimic the spiral pattern of desert snail shells, using centrifugal force to prevent clogs. Even the famous eyes carved above doorways may have been more than symbolic. Their elliptical shape matches the light-filtering adaptations of nocturnal lizards, possibly serving as primitive light regulators to reduce glare and heat gain. This ancient biomimicry wasn't accidental, it was a disciplined science. At the recently uncovered Zoyan Quarter, archaeologists found workshops filled with animal sketches on pottery shards, each annotated with structural observations. One depicts a scorpion's exoskeleton alongside notes about segmented armor, a concept later seen in Petra's flexible wall joints. Another shows a date palm's swaying trunk with calculations about harmonic oscillation, likely inspiring the city's shock-absorbing columns. These weren't artists' doodles, they were engineers' blueprints capturing millennia of evolutionary trial and error. The ultimate testament to this biological wisdom lies in Petra's scars, or rather, their absence. Areas where builders deviated from nature's templates show clear earthquake damage, while biomimetic structures stand intact. The Roman Quarter, added later with classical right angles and uniform pillars, crumbled in quakes that barely touched nearby tombs shaped like tortoise shells. It's a powerful reminder that the Nabataeans' greatest technology wasn't their chisels or scaffolds, It was their humility to learn from creatures that had already solved the desert's harshest challenges. Today, as architects design earthquake-resistant buildings inspired by mussel threads and woodpecker skulls, they're walking a path Petra's engineers carved 2,000 years ago, one where survival whispers are etched not just in stone, but in the living world all around us. The rose-red cliffs of Petra didn't always glow with the natural hues of sandstone. They once blazed with colors so vivid they would make a sunset seem dull. Imagine walking through the sick 2,000 years ago where the Treasury's façade shimmered in cobalt blue, its columns striped with ochre and its pediment adorned with gilded vines. But these pigments weren't just for show. Recent laser scans and microscopic analysis reveal something astonishing. The Nabataeans may have used paint as armor, turning artistry into structural reinforcement. Traces of pigment clinging to hidden crevices tell a surprising story. The famous rainbow sandstone of Petra contains bands of varying density, and the Nabataeans didn't paint randomly. They followed these natural layers like a guide. Iron-rich red ochre, still clinging to load-bearing arches, wasn't just decorative. Its iron content chemically bonded with the sandstone, creating a thin, protective crust that reduced erosion by up to 70%. In areas exposed to harsh winds, scientists found remnants of a greenish copper-based pigment mixed with plant resins, a primitive but effective weatherproofing sealant that filled microscopic pores in the stone. The real breakthrough came when researchers analyzed seemingly plain white patches on the monastery's upper tiers. At first glance, they appeared to be faded decoration, but X-ray fluorescence revealed a deliberate application of calcium carbonate, a mineral that expands and contracts with temperature at nearly the same rate as sandstone. This wasn't paint, it was a thermal regulation system, preventing cracks caused by Petra's extreme desert temperature swings. Even more ingenious were the blue accents found around doorways. These azurite pigments contained trace amounts of quartz, aligning with stress points where seismic forces concentrated. Under ultraviolet light, these areas fluoresced differently, showing how the stone beneath remained uncracked while unpainted sections nearby fractured over time. Color also served as a structural diagnostic tool. The Nabataeans used different pigments to mark areas needing maintenance. A yellow orpiment wash would darken when underlying stone absorbed moisture, signaling weakness before human eyes could detect it. In the Temple of the Winged Lions, alternating red and white stripes on columns weren't just decorative. They created visual reference lines that made even slight tilts or shifts immediately apparent to inspectors. Some of the most vibrant colors had hidden defensive roles. Cinnabar's brilliant red, found in tomb interiors, contained mercury sulfide, a compound toxic to lichens and microbes that could degrade stone. The famed pink zone of the royal tombs gets its hue from madder lake pigment mixed with iron oxide, forming a flexible, almost rubber-like coating that absorbed vibrations during earthquakes. Even the black outlines framing Petra's famous carvings served a purpose. They were applied with a charcoal-based mixture that penetrated deep into the stone, creating reinforcement grids similar to the rebar in modern concrete. The tragedy lies in what time has stolen. Fading pigments exposed underlying stone to the elements, accelerating erosion in once protected areas. But modern conservators are fighting back using the Nabataeans' own techniques. At the Qasr al-Bint Temple, a new protective layer made from reconstructed ancient recipes crushed malachite for green, lapis lazuli for blue, has reduced weathering damage by half compared to untreated sections. The colors may no longer blaze as brightly as they once did, but their legacy endures in the very stones they were meant to protect, a reminder that for the Nabataeans, beauty and strength were never separate pursuits, but two threads woven into the same unbreakable tapestry. Petra didn't just sit at the crossroads of trade routes, it sat atop an economic powder keg. Every spice sack, every incense bale that passed through its gates represented wealth, but also vulnerability. The Nabataeans knew that a single major earthquake could snap those lifelines like a frayed rope, collapsing cliffs onto caravan paths or destroying the cisterns that made desert travel possible. Their seismic innovations weren't just about survival, they were about safeguarding an empire built on the movement of goods. Consider the timing. Petra's golden age coincided with the peak of the incense trade, when frankincense and myrrh flowed from southern Arabia to Mediterranean ports like liquid gold. But these routes threaded through some of the most seismically active terrain on Earth. A quake that damaged Petra's famous water channels could strand caravans for weeks, while landslides in the Sick might block trade entirely. The solution: infrastructure designed to fail gracefully. The Nabataeans built redundant water systems. If one aqueduct cracked during a tremor, 3 others could still supply the city. Their roads incorporated flexible joints of compacted gravel that absorbed shocks without crumbling, ensuring trade could resume almost immediately after a quake. The economics of resilience reveal themselves in Petra's urban planning. Warehouses clustered in zones with natural bedrock foundations, their thick walls not just for storage but for seismic stability. Marketplaces sat atop sand-filled trenches that acted like shock absorbers, protecting delicate goods like glass and pottery from vibration damage. Even the famed Treasury, long rumored to hold hidden riches, may have served a practical purpose. Its strategic position at the canyon mouth allowed it to control trade flow, while its sturdy, monolithic construction ensured it could weather quakes that might disrupt commerce. Trade tariffs funded Petra's seismic adaptations. Inscriptions detail how merchants paid taxes not just in coin, but in labor. Skilled craftsmen from across the empire contributed to reinforcement projects. The result: a kind of ancient disaster insurance pool. When earthquakes damaged critical infrastructure, repairs happened swiftly because the very traders who relied on Petra's stability were invested in its maintenance. This mutual dependency created a virtuous cycle. The safer the city became, the more trade it attracted, which in turn funded even better protections. The Nabataeans didn't stop at defending their own city. They engineered resilience along the entire trade network. Waystations like Aboda and Mamshut featured the same earthquake-resistant designs, creating a chain of safe havens. Caravanserais had flexible stone foundations that prevented collapse during tremors, while watchtowers along the routes were strategically placed on stable outcrops to remain operational after quakes. This wasn't just architecture, it was risk management on an imperial scale. Modern economists see Petra as an early example of disaster capitalism done right. By aligning seismic safety with profit motives, the Nabataeans created a system where protecting lives and protecting business interests were one and the same. Their legacy endures in today's seismic building codes for ports and logistics hubs, proof that when survival and commerce walk hand in hand, even the Earth's tremors can't break their stride. The moment Indiana Jones galloped through the narrow Sick in The Last Crusade, audiences worldwide felt Petra's magic, but few realized they were witnessing one of cinema's greatest inside jokes. That iconic chase scene where Indy races toward the Treasury's glowing façade was filmed in a location carefully chosen not just for its beauty, but for its real-world resilience. The production team knew Petra's monolithic structure could withstand the vibrations of galloping horses and crew footfall, a nod to the very engineering that made the city legendary. Hollywood's fascination with Petra isn't just about aesthetics. It's about a place where reality feels as improbable as fiction. Video games have taken this inspiration even further. In Assassin's Creed Origins, players scale Petra's tombs with parkour moves that would make the Nabataeans proud, though the game's designers took creative liberties by collapsing a few structures for dramatic effect. Ironically, the real Petra's earthquake-proof design means those same ruins have stubbornly refused to crumble for centuries. The Uncharted series went a step further, weaving Petra's seismic adaptations into its plot. One puzzle involves aligning ancient mechanisms based on the city's real acoustic properties, where whispers travel unnaturally far, a gameplay mechanic rooted in actual physics. Even fantasy worlds borrow Petra's resilience. The dwarven cities in the Lord of the Rings films, with their rock-carved grandeur and hidden waterways, echo Nabataean engineering. Peter Jackson's design team studied Petra's shock-absorbing arches when creating Khazad-dûm, recognizing that Middle-earth's most enduring kingdom needed geology-defying logic. Similarly, Game of Thrones designers modeled the Red Keep's subterranean tunnels on Petra's seismic-proof passages, though the show's version included considerably more dragons. Petra's silent canyons have also set the stage for horror. A Doctor Who episode imagined the city's acoustics as the work of alien technology, turning whispers into weapons. The truth that the Nabataeans engineered this silence to mitigate earthquakes is arguably stranger than any sci-fi plot. Meanwhile, indie games like Monument Valley distill Petra's impossible geometry into dreamlike puzzles, proving its architectural language transcends time. The most unexpected homage, Minecraft's 2021 update introduced archaeology, letting players excavate fictional ruins suspiciously reminiscent of Petra. Beneath the blocky graphics lies authentic detail. The game's sandstone variants mimic real-world stratification, and buried relics mirror artifacts found near Petra's water channels. It's a testament to how deeply the city's ingenuity has permeated pop culture, even in pixelated form. What makes Petra so irresistible to storytellers isn't just its beauty, but its baked-in drama. A city carved to survive earthquakes is inherently cinematic, every arch a challenge to physics, every silent corridor a mystery waiting to unfold. The Nabataeans didn't just build a city, they crafted the ultimate narrative playground, where reality's boundaries blur just enough to let imagination soar. Whether indies dodging boulders or gamers solve acoustic puzzles, they're engaging with an ancient legacy that still whispers. The greatest stories are the ones the Earth itself helped write. Walking through Petra's Sick today, most tourists crane their necks upward, marveling at the towering cliffs, but the real secrets lie beneath their feet. That seemingly random groove running along the canyon floor, it's actually a seismic expansion joint carved by the Nabataeans to absorb ground movement. The same engineering brilliance hides in plain sight throughout the city, waiting for observant eyes to uncover it. Take the columns flanking the Great Temple. They appear perfectly straight until you notice their subtle outward lean, a deliberate tilt that helps them self-correct during tremors, much like a skier bending into a turn. The Treasury's iconic façade holds clues most cameras miss. Look closely at its base, and you'll spot thin, wavy lines in the sandstone, not erosion, but carefully preserved hairline fractures the Nabataeans left intentionally. These microcracks act like circuit breakers for earthquakes, allowing harmless small movements that prevent catastrophic splits. Nearby, the theater's seating rows feature barely visible dips between sections, not wear from centuries of use, but shock-absorbing gaps that kept the structure flexible. Modern conservators have marked these with nearly invisible resin dots, protecting them from being smoothed over by unwitting hands. Few visitors realize the original pavement stones beneath their feet tell their own survival story. The Nabataeans laid them in interlocking pentagonal patterns rather than simple squares, a design that disperses seismic energy in 5 directions instead of 4. Some stones even have tiny raised edges, creating friction that prevents slippage during shaking. These aren't ancient imperfections, they're seismic speed bumps, engineered to keep the city's walkways intact when the ground trembles. The most overlooked marvels might be Petra's healed scars. High on the monastery's walls, zigzagging fissures appear filled with a different colored stone. Early archaeologists assumed these were later repairs, but spectroscopic analysis revealed the truth. The Nabataeans injected these cracks with iron-rich slurry that chemically bonded with the sandstone, creating reinforcements stronger than the original rock. It's a 2,000-year-old precursor to modern epoxy resin injections used in earthquake repairs today. Even the souvenir stalls unintentionally showcase Petra's resilience. The most common trinkets, miniature camels and pottery, sit atop shelves carved directly into living rock, their surfaces worn smooth by countless hands. These niches weren't originally for commerce. They were seismic monitoring points where guards could place vibration-sensitive objects like balanced stones or water bowls. If the items moved unexpectedly, it signaled tremors too faint for humans to feel, an early warning system hiding as tourist infrastructure. The desert light plays tricks with Petra's greatest secret. At midday, shadows obscure the most telling features, but come late afternoon, the slanting sun reveals what most miss. Every major structure has a shadow twin. Opposite the royal tombs, across the valley, the cliffs bear faint but precise mirror image carvings. These weren't unfinished projects, they were counterweights, carefully calculated to balance seismic forces across the canyon. The Nabataeans didn't just build monuments, they engineered an entire landscape to dance with earthquakes. Guides often point out the dark streaks staining Petra's cliffs as natural mineral deposits, but there's more to the story. These iron oxide veins mark where the Nabataeans drilled slender vertical shafts to relieve underground stress, ancient pressure valves preventing rock bursts during quakes. Some still function. During minor tremors in 2018, geologists observed sand particles trickling from these fissures, just as they likely did centuries ago to dissipate built-up energy. The ultimate test of Petra's hidden genius comes when you step off the beaten path. Away from the main attractions, half-carved blocks and abandoned quarries tell a silent tale of adaptation. Here, you'll find trial walls where artisans practiced seismic-resistant angles, their surfaces pocked with chisel marks recording generations of experimentation. Some show clear X marks, not ancient graffiti, but indicators of stress points to avoid in final constructions. These aren't failures, they're the Nabataeans' laboratory frozen in stone. Next time you see a tourist leaning against a column for the perfect photo, know they're touching more than history. They're touching a 2,000-year-old earthquake survival manual written in sandstone. Every curve, every crack, every seemingly decorative flourish whispers the same lesson. True resilience isn't about resisting nature's power, but bending with it so gracefully that most won't even notice you've moved. Petra stands not just as a ruin, but as a conversation, a dialogue between human ambition and the Earth's unyielding power. Those rose-red cliffs whisper secrets we're only beginning to decipher. That resilience isn't about conquering nature, but collaborating with it. The Nabataeans didn't fight earthquakes, they listened to them, learning how to let their city sway like a reed in the wind, rather than snap like an oak in a storm. Modern engineers racing to earthquake-proof today's megacities might pause to consider this ancient wisdom. Why spend billions on rigid steel frames when sandstone's flexibility has already weathered 2,000 years of tremors? Why bury shock absorbers under skyscrapers when Petra's architects simply carved them into the living rock? The real lesson isn't in the techniques themselves, but in the mindset behind them. The Nabataeans saw cliffs not as obstacles, but as partners, their buildings emerging from the stone like natural formations rather than impositions. Contrast this with modern cities where concrete slabs blanket the earth like armor, fighting every tremor rather than flowing with it. Imagine if today's architects designed with Petra's humility, letting landscapes guide their blueprints instead of bulldozing through them. Picture earthquake-resistant hospitals modeled after the Treasury's tapered base, or subway tunnels echoing Petra's shock-dispersing curves. Even something as simple as leaving strategic gaps in pavement, as the Nabatians did, could save billions in seismic repairs. But Petra's legacy extends beyond engineering. It's a testament to how culture shapes survival. Those intricate carvings weren't just decorations, they were stress-relieving fractures disguised as art. The silent corridors weren't just spiritual retreats, they were seismic buffers masquerading as sacred spaces. This fusion of beauty and pragmatism challenges our modern divide between form and function. What if today's buildings didn't just withstand disasters, but turned resilience into aesthetic statements? What if every earthquake-resistant feature was also a canvas for human creativity? As the desert winds continue to smooth Petra's edges, they reveal one final truth. Resilience isn't a destination, but a process. The Nabataeans didn't build a perfect city. They built an adaptable one where every crack became a lesson and every tremor informed the next design. Their greatest gift wasn't the structures they left behind, but the proof that civilizations can endure when they move with the earth rather than against it. So the next time you walk through a city, listen closely. Beneath the honking horns and humming wires, the ground itself is speaking. The question is, are we ready to hear what